Well, we're starting a new series, and it's from the book of Genesis. We're going to be looking at Jacob, the Old Testament character in the book of Genesis. And the first message is entitled, Jacob the Deceiver. Jacob the Deceiver from Genesis chapter 27. Now, Jacob is a fellow that everybody should recognize, but I'm going to show you some things about him today that may tell you a different angle on Jacob, something new that you didn't know about him. I call him Jacob the Deceiver. We'll see that as we get into the story. But first, let me remind you of the basic facts. You remember that trilogy of names, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Abraham was the great-grandfather, the one that got it all started, and then his son Isaac, and then his son Jacob. And that's the one we're focused on. Jacob, you recall, had a twin brother, Esau, and there's a lot of stories about Jacob and Esau. Now, the thing about Jacob is he gets more press in the book of Genesis than even his famous grandfather Abraham got. So Abraham is big, he's significant. But Genesis chapter 25 all the way to chapter 50, that's the story of Jacob and his family. He gets half of the book of Genesis. Obviously, he's a significant character. And so a lot of stories that can be told, and we'll be looking at Jacob over these next 4 weeks. But let me tell you this about Jacob. For all the good things you've heard about him, and all the things you imagine as you think of his name, Jacob was a scoundrel. Yeah, he was a bit of a scoundrel. In fact, today we'd call him a con man because of the way that he would deceive so he could take what he wanted to take. And that's part of the story of Jacob. The text I selected for you today is from Genesis 27, verse 34 and 35. This is a conversation. It's between Jacob's father Isaac and his brother Esau. The two are talking. They're talking about Jacob. Isaac said to Esau, "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." Esau replies, "He's rightly named Jacob, because this is the second time now he's taken advantage of me. He took my birthright, and now he's taking my blessing." That's going to really picture what Jacob is going to be like as we tell the story. So let's get into the story of Jacob, and I want to show you Jacob the Deceiver. And the best way to characterize him is this: double-dealing deception. Oh, that's Jacob in a nutshell. Double-dealing deception, lies, and a con. Now, the big story for Jacob, of course, is going to be the day that he told a big, bold-faced lie to his father, and in the process deceived his father and stole the blessing of his brother Esau. And he did it by lying and cheating. Now, I'll remind you of the story. In the story, you've got Isaac with the two boys, and it's time as he's getting older to decide which of the two boys is going to take his place when he's gone. He's going to take the patriarch blessing and put it on one of them, his choice. And he chose Esau. Esau was, after all, the older one. So he told Esau, "You will receive the patriarch blessing. You'll be in charge of the family." And so he said, "I want you to go out and find me some wild game, fresh, bring it back and prepare it, let me eat, and then I will bless you." Now, that's no problem for Esau. He's a hunter, the text tells us. He spent a lot of time out there in the wild, bringing in the wild game for the family to eat. So he takes off to look for something for his father. Now, Jacob, on the other hand, he stayed at home. He tended the flock. When Jacob heard this, he decided to go in and fool his father and steal the blessing. Now, how did he do it? First, he took a goat, and he took the goat meat, and with the help of his mother, prepared it in such a way and seasoned it so that it tasted like wild game. Now he's got the taste right to fool his father. And then he took some of Esau's clothing, and his clothing always smelled. It smelled like the outdoors where he lived most of the time. And so he put Esau's clothing on, and now he smells like his brother. He's got the taste and the smell going. Now, his brother is a hairy man, the text says. He's a smooth skin. So took that goat and skinned it thin and took the skin and wrapped it around his hand and sewed it on with the help of his mother so that when his father touched, he'd feel the hairy skin. And now he's got the taste and the smell and the feel of Esau. Now, once he sets up the deception, he goes in and he announces himself. And when he does what I call the big, bold-faced lie. That is, when you stand in front of someone and face-to-face, you tell them a lie and it's an outright lie. Oh, he did that to his father. He went in, the text says, and he says, "Hey, I'm Esau. I'm your firstborn, and I did exactly what you asked me to do. So let's eat and let me have the blessing." Now, for Isaac, he's a little bit puzzled by this. It's not adding up. I mean, the taste is right, the smell is right, the touch is right, but the sound is off. That doesn't quite sound like Esau. And as much as Jacob may try to disguise his voice, it still wasn't exactly what he expected from Esau. Now, his eyesight is bad, so he can't see for certain, but he's just wondering. And so he'll ask the question, now, is this really you? Is this really Esau? And he'll say, oh, yeah, it's me. And he'll lie right to him. And then here's where it really gets bad. He invokes the name of God. Because Isaac will ask him the question, how did you find the wild game so quickly? You know his answer? Because the Lord your God gave me success. He blessed me. He told a lie and put God's name on the lie. Folks, that's the equivalent of someone who stands up and says, hey, I swear to God with my hand on a stack of Bibles, I'm not lying, and they're standing there lying. Now, folks, don't do that. The lie itself is bad enough. You're in trouble with God. But you put God's name on top of a lie, and you just doubled up your trouble with God. That's no good. And Jacob did it. You see, he was Jacob, the deceiver. And he ran a con on his father and stole his brother's blessing. Now, that's not the only time that he does something like that. The fact is, in those 25 chapters, time and time again, he'll do something deceitful. He'll tell the lie. And so it is, Jacob developed a reputation for being a deceiver. That's why we call him Jacob the deceiver, because he developed that reputation by once again deceiving and lying. If I go back to the text I gave you, 27 verses 34 and 35, remember that conversation between father and son? Isaac said to Esau, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. And Esau replied, oh, he is rightly named Jacob, because that's 2 times now he has taken advantage of me and taken what is mine. Now think about the name Jacob. In the beginning, I'll tell you where the name came from. The 2 boys were born, they're twins. Esau was born first, but even as Esau was coming forth, it says that Jacob's little hand was hanging on to the heel of his brother. Now, when they saw that, they must have thought that was funny, got a little laugh out of it. They even named him Jacob. Jacob was just simply the Hebrew word for grabbing the heel. They took that phrase, grabbing the heel, and turned it into a name and called him Jacob. That's where the name came from. But that was a prophecy. Because what will happen then throughout those 2 boys' life is that Jacob will always be trying to take from Esau whatever belongs to Esau. That's why Esau says, oh, he was named right when he was named Jacob, the one who grabs my heel, because he keeps trying to take advantage of me and take what's mine. Now, after the story of Jacob is told in Scripture, later on, that will become an expression we still use to this day. You ever said this? Oh, you're pulling my leg. That's not real. That didn't happen. See, pulling my leg, pulling the heel, that goes back to this boy who grabbed his brother's heel and was always trying to take from him whatever was his. That was Jacob, the deceiver. Now, this reputation will stay with him for all through those chapters. When he's at home growing up, he gets himself in so much hot water, he finally runs away. He leaves. He goes to a foreign land. There he encounters a man named Laban, becomes part of his family, marries 2 of his daughters, and they become his wives. He works for his father-in-law. His job is to tend the flock. Now, in tending the flock, if you're a shepherd, the way you got paid was not cash. You got paid with a portion of the flock. So each year, the owner would give you some of the sheep and goats, and they become yours. You put them over here in your pen. Now, the father-in-law didn't trust his son-in-law. He had a reputation. And so the way he paid Jacob was, the father-in-law kept all the white sheep and white goats, and he paid Jacob with the spotted and speckled and striped animals. That way, if he ever showed up for a quick inspection, he could look and see whether or not Jacob was sneaking some of his flock over in his pens. Look at the color. You see, people didn't trust Jacob. He wasn't a man you could trust. He was Jacob, the deceiver. Now, this deceiving thing, he got it honest. It was a family problem. If I could take you back and show you his family, I'll start with his mother, Rebecca. You see, it was his mother who came up with that brilliant idea. Let's take goat meat, and I'll fix it so it tastes like wild game. And here's some of Esau's clothes. Put that on. And then she's the one that helped him sew on that hairy skin to fool the dead. See, she helped him deceive her husband, his father. It was her idea. Jacob's learning from his mom. Of course, his father Isaac's not completely honest. Earlier in the book of Genesis, when Isaac and Rebekah were young and traveling through a foreign land, they ran into a guy who was the leader, and he took a fancy to this attractive young lady that's coming to his area. So the question he wants to know is, do you belong to anybody? Are you married? You know what Isaac said? She's my sister. He was so afraid that if he said she's my wife, he'd want to kill the competition and take her, so she's my sister. Well, that's fine then, because then he can court her and try to win the favor of her brother, only to find out that he had lied to him. Actually, he got that from his father Abraham, who did the same trick when he and his wife Sarah were traveling, and somebody saw her and said, is she married? Nope, she's not married to me, she's my sister, and turned out to be a lie. This is a family who tells way too many lies. When they want something, when they're in a jam, they get out of it by lying. Jacob gets it honest. He's Jacob the deceiver. Now, as Jacob the deceiver, what you'll find is that lying is a hard habit to break. Oh, it was a habit that stays with him all through the book of Genesis. Now, you'll see him in the early stories lying and deceiving his brother and his father. You'll see him later when he and Laban are head to head. And here's one liar trying to deceive another liar. Those two go at it. But then finally, years down the road, when he is ready to go back home and face his brother and see if he can get this thing resolved and settled, they will meet. But even as they meet, he's not done lying. See, Jacob, he brings his family with him. He's got all his stuff, his family and everything. Esau comes and he's got a band of soldiers. And as they meet face to face, well, it could have gone bad, but it actually went pretty good. They hugged, they kissed, they wept. Esau let bygones be bygones. He's glad to have his brother home. After they finished, he said, all right, come, we will escort you back home. Now, here's where Jacob says to him, oh, no, don't do that, my Lord. He says, let's don't do that. He said, listen, we're going to be slow. I got women and children. I got flock. We'll slow you down. Listen, you go on ahead to Seir. You take your men and you go on, and we'll come along behind you, and I'll meet you back home. And so the next verse says, so Esau, he took off and he went home to Seir, and Jacob went a different direction. Lied to his brother again. This is a bad habit for Jacob to break. But you know, if you've ever gotten caught in this habit, you know that. Because sometimes telling the truth can be really difficult and challenging, and it's so easy just to tell the lie, and it's easy to be easy time and time again. It's a hard habit to break. But I'll tell you about Jacob and the way the story plays out for those next 25 chapters. He will eventually regret the lies and deceptions. That will be the source of many regrets. You see, Jacob the patriarch did not live a happy and peaceful life. Actually, his life was one trouble after another, largely because, well, he brought it on himself, because he was a liar and a cheat, a deceiver. And so, for example, he alienated his brother Esau, his twin brother, alienated him. And Esau said, as soon as our father is gone and I'm in charge, you're dead. He also had to run away from home. He finally just couldn't stay there any longer. And so he had to pack his bags, go to a foreign land. And as he did, he was gone for the next 21 or so years. Couldn't see his mom and dad. Couldn't see the family. While over there, he met this new family and got settled in there, married the man's daughters, had the man's grandkids. But then when he got ready to go home, he wouldn't even face the guy and tell him what he was doing. He sneaked out during the middle of the night. His father-in-law caught up with him. Why'd you deceive me like that? Why didn't you talk to me? That was Jacob. It's just the way he lived. And even as he went back, he was afraid, so anxious of what was going to happen when he confronted his brother. See, Jacob lived with a lot of issues he brought on himself. And if I could go ahead and tell you the rest of the story of all the rest of the chapters, I'd tell you, for example, about those 12 sons he had. Oh, he was so proud of those boys. Well, proud of them, except one by one, they kept getting into trouble and mischief. We'll talk about that later in our sermons. And Joseph, his favorite, Joseph disappeared. The other brothers had sold him as a slave, sent him down to Egypt, but they went home with their dad and said, oh, he got attacked by a wild animal. He's dead. And he grieved for his lost son for years. And then later, his son Simeon was taken and put in prison down in Egypt, and now he's missing two sons, and he grieved. And then finally, Benjamin, the youngest, the baby of the family, and he was taken and put into jail down in Egypt. And he said, I've lost 3 boys, 3 sons. My life has been nothing but trouble. Everything is against me. You see, that was the life of Jacob. Why? Because lies have consequences. That's the way it works, folks. Lies and consequences, those two belong together. Because if you're going to put a lie or deception out there, you got to know that you're going to get found out one of these days. That's the way it works. Lies are eventually exposed. They're eventually going to come out. The truth will come. Proverbs puts it this way, Proverbs chapter 10, verse 9. It says that whoever walks the path of integrity, the straight path, if you will, well, your path is secure. You'll be okay. But whoever takes the crooked path, you'll eventually be found out. Yeah, that was a fair warning for all of us. Stay on the straight and narrow and do it right. And okay, you take off and try to cut those corners, you're going to get caught. That's the way it works. And so it is, we know every lie will eventually be revealed. Ultimately, at Judgment Day, as God will take every secret and expose it. You're not going to get away with a lie before God. But oftentimes, in the here and now, lies come to the surface and they're exposed. You ever heard the expression that the truth will come out, or as sometimes we'll say it, the truth will out? If you've ever used that expression, it goes back to Shakespeare. You were quoting Shakespeare, perhaps didn't know it, from the Merchant of Venice. You see, Shakespeare invented that phrase, became popular thereafter, because it's common sense. It's conventional wisdom. You can tell your lies and your deceptions, but the truth will come out. It's the way it works. And so it is, as we tell our lies and deceptions, eventually we got to pay for them. Eventually, we got to deal with the consequences. I'll tell you one of the big consequences, trust will be broken. Yeah, you tell a lie and trust will be broken. Tell a lie once, and then all your other truths will be questionable. That's how it works. I don't know what to trust now that you've been caught in a lie. Now, if you think about that, that makes a lot of sense, but really that's what people have been saying all through the ages. They've learned it the hard way. Can you remember back in school, old philosophy class, can you remember the name, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche? Nietzsche is quoted as saying this. He said, "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on, I can't believe you." Yeah, see, that's common sense. Once you tell me a lie, I'm not sure I know when to trust you anymore. And that's a problem. Trust takes years to build, seconds to break, and then forever to try to repair once again. That's a lesson that life teaches us the hard way. Jacob learned that lesson as people did not trust him. Now, not only do you have trust issues once you've been caught in your lie, but there's also other consequences as well. You see, there's inevitable consequences that you're going to have to deal with, because a lie, a deception is kind of like a ticking time bomb. And you know eventually it's going to go off. And when it does, it's going to create a mess that's beyond your control, and you got to deal with it best you can. What kind of things might happen that you now have to deal with? Oh, all types of things. Like, for example, a strained relationship. Friends, and a lie can now separate them and the friendship is strained. Or it can break up relationships like a marriage, where you've lied and cheated on me one time too many. I don't trust you anymore. Yeah, that's one of the problems. There's also penalties that come from wrong action, as well as losses that you have to take in the process. You know, life teaches us that lesson time and time again. I came from the world of academics before I came here. In the world of academics, a student who cheats on a test or plagiarizes a paper may rationalize it and say, I've got to score a good grade because I've got to pass this class. I got to do that so I can graduate. But I tell you, if I catch you, you may get a 0 on the test or on the paper. That's worse than the low score. You may actually forfeit the class because of the cheating. And in a school that has a high moral code, you may actually be kicked out of school. Yeah, the lie has consequences that hurt dearly. Same is true in athletics. You've heard the stories in the news of someone in athletics who loses because they were caught cheating and lying. That happens, for example, when you've got someone who's got a great record and then we find out, they were doping, using steroids or some other substance, and then the record gets erased. Or a team that gets disqualified and all their wins eliminated because they had an ineligible player on the roster. That happens also as well when the IRS comes to you and says, all right, we've got some undisclosed income that you didn't put on your form, and not only do you now have to pay what you didn't pay before, but boy, they throw the big penalty on as well. And the same is true in business and in employment. You see, if your boss ever catches you doing something that is dishonest and wrong, you could get fired. Why? Because he doesn't know if he can trust you anymore. It can cost you your job. I read about a preacher, well-known preacher named Stuart Briscoe. preached for a big mega church up in Wisconsin, written a lot of books. But he tells the story of when he was a young man and he's working his various jobs. He worked for a bank at one point. Now, working at that bank one day, took a phone call. It was for the president. He went back to the office, said, call from so-and-so. He said, tell him I'm out. I don't want to talk to him. He said, I can't do that. That'd be lying. Made the president angry. He's ready to fire him. He says, now listen, if I won't lie for you, then you can be confident I won't lie to you. So he knew if I ever tell a lie, nobody's going to know whether or not they can trust me thereafter. That's what happens. Things can be broken and lost because that's part of the consequences of being caught in the lie. You know, if you get a messy ending to a deception or lie, you have no one to blame but yourself because you made a foolish choice. It was a foolish idea to tell the lie, knowing what might happen if you get caught. You know, here's the way lies work. When a lie is conceived, it's with the knowledge of what might happen, the troubles that might come if you get caught. That's why we tell ourselves, I hope I don't get caught. I hope they don't find out already. That should be your warning. Don't do this. That's a foolish thing to do. As Paul put it in the book of Galatians, whatever it is that you sow, that's what you're going to reap. You know, actions have a tendency to come back on you, and lying does that. So it is Jacob teaches us that lesson as we watch Jacob time and time again lie and deceit and take what is not his, and then we also watch him as he pays the consequences of those lies and deceptions. But enough about that. Let's turn this around with something positive. Let's have a positive ending here. I want to give you some lessons from Jacob that we can take home with us. Let's talk about truth. Truth and integrity, because that's what you and I want as we try to live what's right. Let me tell you this. I'm going to give you just a good, let's all do this, and that is this. Be truthful. At all times and all things, be truthful. Speak the truth. That's just a simple rule. We can all memorize that. Now, I could go on because that's so obvious. Let me break it down for you, though. I want you to speak the truth. I want you to speak the simple truth. When I say the simple truth, what I have in mind is don't embellish, don't add to it things that aren't actually true. You've turned the truth into a lie. No, the simple truth. Tell it like it is. Just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. Now, you think about that embellishing. A lot of people have gotten in trouble with that. For example, it's always been in the news, the important person who's now in a scandal because, well, they embellished their resume. A lot of politicians, a lot of big CEO business types, a lot of entertainers, they said this in an interview or on their resume and then somebody caught them. One of our current presidential candidates, well, he ran for president before, got caught on that time because what he said in a news interview was, he said, I was in the top half of my graduating law class. Somebody went and checked. Out of 85, he was number 76. I wouldn't call that the top half. That's the very bottom. He had to explain later, he said, well, I was in the top half, but then one of my papers got marked off for plagiarism, so they've dropped me. I'm thinking, you didn't help your case. You know, some of them aren't as smart as they seem, are they? Can any of you remember Brian Williams? NBC Nightly News. Good guy. Everybody loved him. He was number one in his day until he told one evening news story with a little bit of embellishment. Told about flying in a convoy of helicopters, 3 of them across Iraq. One of them got hit by a surface-to-air missile, and they all had to make an emergency landing because they were under fire. Told that story on the news. Boy, that became big news until the next day. You know, there were a lot of other people over there with him, and they told a different story. No, that was one convoy. They were 30 minutes behind in another one. And when they made a quick landing, it's because they had engine trouble. Nobody was firing at them. Those two got merged together in that nightly news story. He had to apologize for that, and it cost him his job. Because once you tell a lie as a newscaster, does anybody know when they can trust you thereafter? You see how this lying thing works? And trust is broken when we don't tell the simple truth. Not just the simple truth, but the whole truth. Don't allow your silence to give somebody a misleading misconception. Now, let me caution you. First, I'm a big fan of not saying things. I'm a big fan of discretion, where I don't tell you everything I know. I keep some of it quiet. However, if my silence gives you the wrong impression and you're giving me praise I don't deserve, I believe in credit where credit's due. That's where I got to speak up, or else I've deceived you. For example, if you ever see me walk in, and I'm bringing a casserole or a pie, and it goes on the table, and you take a bite and say, that was delicious, you're a great cook. I'm going to have to correct that because I don't cook. My wife does the cooking. And that would be wrong for me to give you that wrong impression. Likewise, I used to teach students that if you're going to preach, it's okay to borrow from others, but borrow good ideas. And I have some people out there who ask me in advance, can I just take that sermon outline? Yeah, preach it. It works. And so borrowing's great. We always taught them, but always give credit where credit's due. It's one thing to preach somebody else's stuff, and then people say, what a great sermon you gave us, and you don't ever let them know, actually, I borrowed some of that. I had help from someone. That's just being honest. You want to tell the simple truth and the whole truth and the hard truth, and that's the hard thing to do, is when telling the truth means I'm going to have to take some lumps here. I don't want to do that. I'll do it anyway. Do you remember the comic strip Garfield? Maybe you know the creator, Jim Davis. Jim Davis said this one time. Jim Davis said that the truth will set you free, but first it's going to give you a whole lot of grief and misery. First it's going to give you trouble. You see, the thing about telling the truth is it may cost me, but the lie is going to cost me even more. Go ahead and tell the hard truth. You tell the simple truth, the whole truth, the hard truth, and let me say the honest truth. And while that may sound redundant, here's what I've got in mind. You tell the truth so that when you get done, you've got a peace of mind. You feel good. You feel honest because, well, there's no lie that I got to remember exactly what I said in the lie because the next time I'm asked, I got to say the same thing or they'll catch me. You don't have to worry about that. You just tell the truth. There's no lie that you're hoping doesn't get caught and you're anxious about whether or not you'll get busted. No, you tell the truth, the honest truth, and then enjoy peace of mind. That's the kind of people you and I need to be. We need to be not like Jacob the deceiver, but people who tell the truth and then feel good about it. And not only that, I told you I wanted to give you 2 lessons here. I want you to be truthful and be trustworthy. Be truthful and trustworthy. And the two go together because if you do have a pattern of telling the truth, people will trust you. Oh, you'll be trusted by folks. They'll look at you and they'll see you as the kind of person that if you say something, they know you mean it. That your word is your bond. That they know they can count on you with whatever it is you say to them. Every one of us ought to be that kind of person where people trust us. Last thing, we want to be someone like Jacob, the deceiver, with a reputation where people know they can't trust you. If I was to bring this to a good conclusion, I'm thinking of Psalm 15. Psalm 15 is where the question is asked of God, so who may dwell in your sacred tent? Who can live on your holy mountain? Here's the answer. The answer is whoever will walk in blameless, whoever will do what is righteous, whoever will speak the truth from their heart. That's how you and I should be living every day. Walking blameless, where there's no criticisms, no wrong that can be leveled against us. Doing the right thing, and most of all, speaking the truth straight from the heart. That's the kind of life we want to be living, because that's the life that's pleasing to God. Jacob the deceiver was a guy who chose a different path, a crooked path, and his ways were found out time and time again. Let's be the person that walks the straight path, the path of integrity, a path of truth and integrity where people can trust our word.